Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In. How's everybody doing out there in internet land? I hope you're doing okay. I'm doing all right. It's good to check in every once in a while. This is a live stream that I do daily during the week at 11:30 Eastern Time, daylight savings time right now, because daylight savings is still a thing that we do in 2020 because no one has figured out a way to just universally ban it. Seriously, if you run on that as a platform for president, I would probably vote for you just to get rid of daylight savings. It's just the most pointless exercise in futility that I can think of today. So, today's topic is, well, actually, we're going to talk a little bit about language and grammar, which sounds kind of dry, but it actually does serve a point. Ooh, and someone is actually in the chat, so that's exciting as well. Okay, we'll open it in the browser. Hi, Vamsi. Welcome to the live stream. I'm glad that you joined me. This is awesome. All right. So, the thing that I wanted to talk about today is all about sort of the language police and what we do to each other in the technical field and why it's mostly unnecessary and actually counterproductive to getting communication across and actually thinking about the valid points that people make instead of just trashing on, their improper use of a particular word. Before we dive into that, just a few housekeeping things. One, I will be speaking today at the CTO Advisor Virtual Conference. That's a free conference that you can find online. It's got a bunch of great speakers that actually starts right now, but I'm doing my live stream before I jump over to that. My presentation is a little bit later in the day, but seriously, register for it if you see this in time. And I think the videos are actually going to be published for a month. So even if you miss the live conference, you still have an opportunity to catch up and see all the interesting presentations that were there. I think Keith really put on a fantastic show. So definitely check it out. CTO Advisor Virtual Conference. Second thing is the podcast is still available. If you go to anchor.fm, you can check out the audio version of this live stream as a podcast. So if you prefer not to look at me and just listen to my beautiful voice, feel free to go over and grab that. Okay, with that out of the way, let's now talk about language. This all started because I did a Twitter post that was basically making fun of the fact that some people confuse your, like Y-O-U-R, with you, the contraction of you-are, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. And usually it's that they mean you are, but they use Y-O-U-R, which is the possessive noun. So that doesn't, I was kind of making fun of it, but I was also making fun of myself for making fun of it because it's not really fair. And it got me thinking about the way that we treat language, especially technical folks. And I think we are especially guilty of it more so than other groups. And the reason for that is because as technical people, we tend to view things through a very technical black and white lens. And that is very useful for highly technical things where there isn't gray area. Something is either right or it's wrong. You either did that thing right and it now works, like you configured your network properly and it works, or you didn't configure it properly. BGP is a protocol and it has rules, and either you follow those rules or you don't follow those rules. And because of the way that we do that, and we're used to writing in a very technical manner where words have to have very strict and literal meanings to convey information properly, we have a tendency to view other communications through that lens. And oftentimes that lens is not an appropriate one for the context of the communication. I think we have to take it back to what is the point of written and verbal language? The whole point is to communicate information with another person. And as long as that communication is happening successfully, then we don't have to get super bogged down in the format in which that communication is happening. Verbal language has the added benefit of being able to usually, but not always, see the person and at the very least hear their tone of voice. And that can help clear up ambiguity within our language. However, the written word doesn't have those benefits. So ambiguity can play a larger role, which is why our language tends to be a little more precise when it's written. You'll also probably notice that spoken language changes more rapidly, and new idioms and syntactical things happen with the spoken language faster than they do with the written language. In part because of the flexibility of the spoken word, but also in part because you tend to speak more than you write. What's interesting is in the last 20 years, with the rise of the internet and social media, that has flipped a little bit. And now written language is evolving faster than it ever has because so many more people are writing constantly. If you think about the amount of writing that you might have done 30 years ago, most of your writing was going to be very formal in nature because you're writing a letter to someone, probably, or leaving a note for someone might be slightly less formal. That was the bulk of the writing that you were doing. And then most of your communication was happening via the phone or in person. So I would say, the bulk of a normal person's communication was happening through the spoken word. With the rise of the internet, and now you have email and texting, and you have social media, and you have Twitter, and all these other formats where the written word has taken precedence in that context. Now, the speed at which that written word has to change has also accelerated, and you see that it's very well documented in this book called Because Internet. If you just search for that, you'll find it. And it's a really entertaining book that talks about this whole change. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about, and I probably went off on a bit of a tangent there. What I want to talk about is when someone uses language incorrectly and you take them to task for it. And, the easy example is the one that I gave, where someone improperly uses your and your, or the there. There's three different versions of there, and they all are for different occasions, but they all sound the same. Yeah, someone can obviously mess that up as well. Another really common one that's in the technical community is on premise versus on premises. And I do know the difference. On a premise is a thought. It's a concept that you're trying to get across. If you're on premise, you're on topic. A premises is a location. So if you're on premises, you're on a location. You're at someone's location. So when you hear people talk about computing on premises versus computing in the cloud, they're talking about a physical location. What happens fairly often is people will say on premise when they mean premises. And there is a certain group of people who really like to make fun of that person and talk about how they're getting it wrong and sort of invalidate everything else they're saying because they used premise versus premises wrong. And while I understand where they're coming from, technically it is incorrect. You can tell from the context clues of the conversation which thing they're talking about, premises versus premise. And some people have just defaulted to saying on-prem to avoid this whole confusing conundrum, right? I think there's a number of different potential motivations for correcting someone. Now, first of all, just making fun of them is almost always wrong. You're basically punching down. And that's not always true. Like if a big corporate sponsored PR piece comes out and it has all these grammatical errors, it's okay to make fun of it. You're kind of punching up in that case because it's a big faceless corporation. It's not an individual. And yes, an individual wrote that, but you're not making fun of the individual. You're making fun of the entire corporate machination that produced this PR piece. So that's probably justified. But making fun of an individual person because they messed up some grammar or syntax, especially when you can still figure out what their point is relatively easily, is really just a way of punching down. It's implying that you are in some way superior to that person because you have a certain amount of knowledge and you have a certain amount of knowledge around the English language specifically, which also sort of punches down, or what's the word I'm looking for? It's ironic that I'm looking for a word. It really punches down on non-native English speakers as well, because they may not have as nuanced of an understanding of the English language, and I don't expect them to. What I want to do is communicate with those people and understand the point. What are they trying to get across? What's the premise that they're trying to get across? I don't really care that they have a little bit of struggle with different possessive nouns versus contractions, or if they don't differentiate between premise and premises. That is not important to me. What's important to me is the point that they're trying to get across. By making fun or being corrective, overly corrective to people who incorrectly use grammar or terminology, what you're really doing is you're refusing to engage on their main point. You're nitpicking to avoid engaging on the core concept that they've brought up. And I think that is counterproductive to the whole conversation, especially in the technical realm. Now, there absolutely is a way to be genuinely supportive and try to lead someone down the path of using terminology correctly. And that's usually done in private and not in public, because you praise in public and you correct in private. That's the correct managerial style for doing things. And that's probably also the correct way to do it here. If you see someone misuse terminology, ideally you take them aside or you send them a private message and say, hey, just want to let you know, this is the way that this terminology should be used. In the future, you may want to, watch out for that, because people are going to make fun of you and try to invalidate your whole point by just, picking out the fact that you used a term wrong. Obviously, it's not fair to you, so, make sure that you change that in the future. So that's my general thoughts when it comes to the whole, well, actually, the way you properly use that sort of attitude that comes from the technical folks that are in my social sphere. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Is this something that really bothers you and you absolutely have to correct people? Or is this something you're comfortable just letting fly as long as the main point is actually getting through clearly and consistently? Feel free to leave a comment in the YouTube post. Hit me up on Twitter. I'm Ned1313. Or find some other way to engage with me. I don't know. You could mail me a note or hit me up on LinkedIn. Until tomorrow, stay healthy. Stay safe. Take care now.